there may be some other folks. There may be some other folks popping on, but as far as the starting the meeting, we Bob H, we're in a position we can do so.
Still one of the problems we need to order. Agenda adjustments. There is one that we know, number 5, new business to make.
Scramble.
And because the meeting is being held remote, all of our votes will be done by roll call. And this meeting is being recorded. Number 1, project approvals. I'll ask for a motion to approve the June 1st, 2023 minutes.
I'll make a motion, I guess. You scrambled, Bob.
Bob, if you'd like, I could. Do you want me to read through the motion?
Try it again.
Okay.
I'll ask for a motion to approve the June 1st, 2023 minutes. So scrambled.
A little
Go
bit.
ahead, Tom. Go ahead, Tom.
Okay. So Bob was asking for a motion to approve the June 1st, 2023 minutes. And Dan, you were motioning that?
Yeah, yes, I will.
Cohasset,
Okay. Whitman and Cohasset, any discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll call the roll. Bob, do you want to take that back, or do you want me to run through the roll for you?
Okay, I'll try it.
Okay.
Bob Edwin, yes. Ron Hickey,
Yes.
Steve Doyle,
Not on the call.
George Clooney,
yes. Cohasset, yes.
Vern Coughlin,
Yes.
Jim Hine,
Not on the call.
Jim Manning.
Sorry, Bob. Yeah, Jack is on the call. Jack, seeking your approval for the minutes, Jack.
Yes. Bob Mello,
Yes.
Bob Moore,
Aye.
Vincent Bucci,
Yes.
Sandy Walner,
Not on the call, Bob.
Frank Lola Jr.,
Hanson, yes.
Ron Christie,
Tom P., that was for you.
Oh, yes.
motion carries.
Boy,
First $20 you get 10,000 for you. We'll address it next week.
And just for a quick translation on Bob's behalf, we're gonna turn that over. Bob was turning it over to Jen. She'll walk us through the next portion of the agenda, which involves a series of motions to vote on contract amendment, invoices, et cetera. And when Jen's done presenting, we'll turn it back over to Bob for subsequent roll call votes.
All right. Thank you. I will share my screen, take you through. All right. I take this to the slideshow. Do folks see that? The big
Yes.
slide?
yep.
Okay, good. All right.
Grass needs to be.
Say it again, sorry. All right, so I'll take you through the agenda. As you know, we just did the meeting minutes from our last meeting. Then I will take you through the DRA contract amendment number 1 with kind of an overview of what it does to the budget as well. And Then I will take you through invoices, and both the contract amendment number 1 and the invoices will need votes for approval. So as Tom mentioned, I will hand that back to Bob to do roll call. Following those approvals, I'll take you through a schedule update and then hand it off to DRA for designer updates. That's the most exciting part. So bear with me and get through this, the financial details and the schedule, and you'll be rewarded with some fun design updates. From there, I have public comment, new business, and adjourn the meeting. So with that, this is the total project budget update and does reflect the contract amendment for DRA, as well as the invoices for this month. Just so you can see, here we have in the first column the total project budget. So these are the budget lines as they were originally. Next up, the authorized changes. Like I said, this shows the amendment number 1, in the amount of $43,670. That shows that amount coming from the environmental and sight line, and moving up to the architecture and engineer feasibility study schematic design line, so DRA's contract. And you can see the change in the revised total budget line to show you each of these budget line items, still totaling $2 million for the total feasibility study budget amount. Next column, you can see the total committed. So again, this shows the actual contracts, and it does again show that amendment in here as well. Then we have committed to date, so by percentage, and next is the actual spent to date. So that is the amount of the invoices received. So again, it reflects the invoices that are up for approval tonight. If for any reason you choose not to approve the amendment or the invoices, I will update this budget and send it out and take those off. And at the very end here, we have balance to spend. So that is the unspent amount. In this comment section here, just for your knowledge going forward, this will show, this relates down to this bottom line of feasibility study agreement budget transfers. So number 1, this budget revision request will reflect that change from the environmental and site line item up to the designer contract line item. Does anyone have any questions on this budget page before I move on to the amendment?
I don't.
Was that yes? Sorry, I think I heard someone.
I said, Noel said no.
Okay, good. Perfect. All right, moving on. So the designer contract amendment number 1. Here you can see in this first column, this is a snapshot from the actual amendment that was sent out earlier today. So you can see the original contract amount for DRA's contract was $1 million even. If you move over to the 2 lines, you'll see that the amount of this amendment is $43,670 for a total. Their total contract amount would now be $1,043,670. And for the scope that's included, there will be a preliminary geotech study, an environmental site assessment, wetlands flagging, and topo survey. And we're looking to do all of this work before students are back in the building to avoid disruption. Are there any questions on the scope that's included in this amendment?
Jen, could you just for the record, just explain again the reason that this money is why this money is being moved? It's not increasing the budget, it's not increasing the bottom line, but it's being moved from one line to the other. Could you just speak to that briefly?
Yes, absolutely. Let me actually just take you back to this line here. So on the right-hand side of this total project budget, we have the budget broken into 4 categories currently. If the project moves forward and is approved, this will get to be a much larger budget with more line items. These 4 line items are how the MSBA breaks down the feasibility study budget. So the first line is the OPM budget. The second is for the designer contract. The third is environmental and site, which relates to what we are approving right now. This 300,000 that was in there before we are moving this 43,000, that is allocated specifically for items like wetlands flagging, environmental site assessment, all of these items related to the environmental and site. So this fits within the budget. This is the amount that DRA told me it was going to be when we signed their contract. So every time we get one of these proposals, we'll be moving money out of this $300,000 line item up into the DRA contract line item. We also have this fourth line for other. This 200,000 is kind of a contingency for our for the feasibility study for unforeseen items, other things down the line. So we'll be tracking everything against these two, really these two line items as the top two lines are committed. I hope, does that help a little bit?
Thanks, Jen. I appreciate you going through that. We'll see more of these types of amendments going forward. It's just, this is the first one. So thank you for just clarifying that.
Absolutely. Are there any other questions on this
Yeah.
item?
Yeah, I have a question. Do we have, see, I don't know what was at on the land when South Shore was first built. But I know one of the issues we're doing with our DPW is that we need borings to test the soil. Do we need any of that? And
Yes.
do we see any problems?
Carl or Judd, do you want to speak to this?
Sure, this is Carl. Good evening, everyone. The first line item in this amendment, the preliminary geotech study, is just for that purpose, so that we can build on the information we already have, but we want to do some new investigation just to determine the kind of soils, the level of groundwater, if there's any rock, things like that. So that's what that first line item is as part of this amendment.
Yeah, I was thinking of more like anything that was contaminated
Well,
soil.
that's just a good lead in, Dan. That's the second line item. The environmental site assessment is the so-called phase 1 environmental. That's where they don't really test the soil in that one. This is the one where they do research. So they look at the history of the land and see if there's any reason to believe that there might be some contamination. So that's why it's called
Right.
phase 1.
Yep.
So
Right,
they'll
that's
look
just
to
the
see if
concern
there were
that I
ever, buried oil tanks, things like that.
Yeah, buried something.
Yeah.
Buried treasure, maybe. All right, are there any other questions on amendment number 1? If not, we would be looking for a vote to approve amendment number 1 in the amount of $43,670.
I'll make, okay, I'll second that motion.
Okay, and without
Wait a minute.
objection, members of the committee, with Bob H's audio, I'll call the roll with a motion from Bob Mola and a second from Dan. Is there any further discussion? Okay, Bob Haywood. Yes. Thumb and a thumb up to just verified. Keith Boyle,
Yes.
George Cooney,
Cohasset, yes.
Jim Coughlin,
Yes.
Jack Manning,
Yes.
Bob Mello,
Yes.
Bob Mola,
Aye.
Dan Salvucci,
Yes.
Frank Mola,
Well, it's Hanson, what do you want?
okay, Tom Petrozelli,
Yes.
thank you. And I'm also a yes. Frank Mola, are you able to hear this? Okay, I'll just record.
He's out bear hunting.
I'll record that as a just a non-vote for now. Okay, so thank you. That motion carries. Jen, back to you.
Thank you very much. All right, moving into invoice approvals. So this month we have 3 invoices, 2 left field invoices and 1 DRA invoice for a total of $140,500. The first invoice from left field is invoice number 3 for services for June in the amount of $29,000. Second is the left field invoice number 4 for services during July for $29,000. And the final invoice is for DRA for services through the end of July in the amount of $82,500 for a total of $140,500. And that is what we are looking to approve this evening. Does anyone have any questions on the invoice?
No. I'll make the motion, we approve.
Second.
Motion from Bob Mola, second from Bob Mello. Thank you. Any further discussion on the invoices? If not, we'll go to the roll call. Bob Haywood,
Yes.
Keith Boyle,
Yes.
George Cooney,
Cohasset, yes.
Jim Coughlin,
Yes.
Jack Manning,
Yes.
Bob Mello,
Yes.
Bob Mola,
Aye.
Dan Salvucci,
Yes.
Frank Mola. Okay, Tom Petrozelli,
Yes.
and I'm also recorded as a yes. The motion carries. Jen, I'll
Thank
turn
you.
it back over to you.
Thank you. All right. Oops. All right, so I will quickly take you through the schedule update. Tried to kind of reconfigure the schedule in a way that visually shows what's going on over the next up through early 2025 for the feasibility study. So this first box here shows the preliminary design program. So first off, the 3 green boxes here show the 3 main submittals to the MSBA. So starting off in, you can see that we are here in this green box here. There's a little bit of feedback. I'm gonna mute Bob. Sorry, Bob. So preliminary design program, the PDP, we are looking to submit that at the end of September. The PDP will include an evaluation of existing conditions, the educational visioning, which we've wrapped up, and we will be turning into the draft educational plan, which Tom and his team have been working on. This will all inform the initial space summary done by DRA. They will probably provide a little bit of an update on this shortly. Then we will also have an evaluation of alternative options. So by the end of September, we'll be looking at a matrix full of options, considering everything from a code upgrade to a renovation to an addition renovation and a completely new building. And we will be considering, the MSBA has given you several design enrollments to consider. So each of those options will also be considered across all of those design enrollments, the student enrollments that MSBA has provided. So there will be a lot of options at the end of September to consider. All of these will also have comparative only cost estimates. You'll want to, want to be clear that they will be comparative at that stage. We're kind of just making the same assumptions across all of the options. So we can compare the options against each other. It's going to be a ballpark range. So that will be due to the MSBA at the end of September. we will need a vote of this committee to submit that to the MSBA. And ahead of the vote to submit the entire preliminary design program to the MSBA, the school committee will need to vote to approve the draft educational plan. So there's a lot happening in the next 2 months to get the first submittal into the MSBA. So following that, we move into the preferred schematic report, which is due at the end of December of this year. So we take what we did in the PDP. We do a final evaluation of existing conditions. We finalize the educational plan. We'll have a lot of, well, I think I'm just getting some more feedback. Bob Hayward, I'm sorry.
Bob Hayward, could you mute?
I'm going to mute you real quick. Sorry. Excuse me. So we update the educational plan to finalize it based on MSBA's comments, based on fine tuning with the team. And again, that will be run by the school committee. From there, we will also, throughout this whole process, we will be evaluating all of the options that were identified in the PDP that were submitted to the MSBA. During the course of these 3 months, October, November, and December, we'll be looking to narrow down that large list of options to a single solution, a single preferred solution for the project. It seems like a lot of work, and it is, but it will be an exciting 3 months. Again, cost estimates will be done in order to compare the options against each other. During this time, the district will also need to decide on an enrollment to move forward with, so that the preferred option is the preferred option for the enrollment chosen. So you really have that one option moving forward into the next phase. So there's a lot that needs to happen between now and December. A lot of decisions, a lot of evaluation. It seems overwhelming, but you have left field and DRA are going to break it down step by step, meeting by meeting. There's a lot happening, but we do want to open your eyes that it will be a busy fall. So at the end of December, we will submit all of that information in the PSR, the Preferred Schematic Report, to the MSBA. They take 2 months to review that, and I'm missing a date on here. We are looking to have that approved by them at the, I think it's February 28th, it's the end of February, their Board of Directors meeting. But we'll also be meeting with them off to the side in smaller groups with the MSBA to review that submittal, and we'll be moving forward to develop the schematic. That single option that we chose, will be developing that further with DRA as the MSBA reviews the PSR submittal. So schematic design really starts at the beginning of 2024. We finalize the design program. You'll have, but by the end of June is when we're looking to submit the schematic design report to the MSBA. By that time, we will have schematic design documents to submit. We'll be submitting the DESE submittal to the MSBA, who reviews it and then also sends it along to DESE. We will have a total project budget by the end of that time. That is a budget that, based on the cost estimates done at the end of schematic design, that we will live with for the rest of the project. So that is a very important time for those cost estimates. It will not be comparative at that point. Those will be cost estimates that decide the budget for the project. So that all gets submitted to the MSBA at the end of June, and then they take 2 months to review it. There's some back and forth between the team, the district, the MSBA in that 2-month period. And then at the end of August, the MSBA Board of Directors will vote on whether to approve that our project to go forward in the MSBA's eyes. But that's not the end of this process. Then we need to secure project funding. So once we get the MSBA's approval, the district will need to get approval from the sending communities, either by going to the town meetings or possibly doing a district-wide ballot. So this is something, and maybe Tom, you want to jump in and add some color. I know this is an ongoing discussion right now. There is the concern that, you know, November of 2024 is a presidential election, and we do need to stay out of that that window, which is why there is so much time between the MSBA Board of Directors vote and the end of my chart here. Tom, did you want to add any color to that?
Just a little bit, Jen, thank you. It's ultimately the school committee's authority, not the school building committee's authority, to determine the direction for seeking a project approval. The two options Jen outlined: go to 9 separate town meetings, go to a district ballot. That'll be an agenda item for the school committee to look at deeper into the fall, looking at the pros and cons. Most other vocational projects that have been done recently have done a district-wide ballot. And because of the presidential election and all of the demands placed on town clerks in our district, if that were the path that would have to be delayed slightly. And that is why the projection of the earliest window after the election and the ballot counting and the auditing that clerks have to, really have to, take ownership of and see that to conclusion, it would be January of 2025. So separate official conversation in terms of the committee deciding the proper, deciding the path, but ultimately a decision that will have to be on record later this fall.
Very
I have a
busy fall.
Question. Tom, I have some questions for you. Tom, is Whitman the only town that has other building projects in motion? Like our DPW, that has been approved. You got our middle school that they're looking to get approved. That vote will come in November of this year, whether that gets approved or not. And then ours 2 years later. Or are we the only town that's in that situation?
I believe, and others on this call representing other communities can certainly correct me. My research in the last few months, Dan, would say Whitman is the only community who has 2 capital projects going to the voters, one after the other. So DPW project voted and approved, Whitman Middle School project coming up to Whitman voters in November of 2023. And then as we're discussing here, I know Jim Coughlin, I think there might be fire, perhaps talk of a fire department, or at least that was part of a town meeting discussion. And George Cooney, I know there was a town meeting article about town hall renovations in Cohasset. So by all means, there's always something going on, but I think, Dan, your community probably has the most that are being queued up for approval, but there may be some other examples that I'm not aware of from towns represented here.
I think the
And all
Abington project
towns
might be a
have to
couple.
approve it, right?
I'm sorry,
All
Dan, say that.
towns have to approve it.
Well, if you go the district-wide ballot in early 2025, that is a single ballot question, an election held in all 9 of our communities on the same day and time. And it is an aggregate vote. And so if you go the town meeting route, then to your point, that is you need to secure a majority approval at 9 separate town meetings. This is just like the debt we brought to our towns a few years back. We went the town meeting route. If any one town voted that debt authorization down, the matter would have died. So if it's a district-wide ballot, it is not town specific. It is an aggregate vote.
That might be the way to go.
Yeah.
Where it's a majority, yeah. Okay.
And Jim, you were saying?
I think the Abington Fire Department, that's probably a couple years away, so we should be safe with that. So, and I believe George and I were at the Cohasset town meeting. I believe the town hall in Cohasset was voted down, so that's back to the drawing board. That might be another couple of years before they come up. So we're safe from
believe that's
Cohasset as
right.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, Norwell, we bought a new town hall and we also have highway under construction right now. So we got those, but the town hall is paid for, so we don't have to worry about that. And
That
the,
was generous of you, Bob.
well, we had a shrewd town administrator for a while, Dan. Too bad we lost him.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you all. Are there other questions relating to the schedule for feasibility study?
No, I guess I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit. I'm an avid digger into the state workings, not the House and Senate, but the governor's end of it. She's talking about increasing funding for vocational construction. Matter of fact, I read one yesterday or the day before, up to 99% of the construction cost. So maybe we will come out, and this is vocational, so it's maybe we'll come out better than we thought.
Bob, I can just add that in the at the end of the last, with the approval of this last state budget, while I don't have it, I don't have it down precisely. I know there was money put into the budget to help support several regional VOCs who are further along than us in the pipeline, who were hit with some real inflationary costs.
Mhm.
And so that relief, while it was not, we are not far enough along in the process, I think, to be eligible for it. That may be an outlet with future state budgets for us to talk to our legislative delegation about to help offset
Yeah.
costs. That's the latest I've heard about that,
Yeah.
at least with the close of the budget.
I think that also with the latest moves from the legislature, it looks like MSBA may be increasing their eligible cost per square foot, either at the October board or December board.
And that is significant for us because, as we all know, vocational schools are held to the same cost per square foot, and we're a more expensive building to build. So we can always tell people that we're going to get reimbursed for a certain percentage, but the rest of the phrase is of eligible costs. And so when they put these caps on, it really jams us up. So what Lynn is saying is would be welcome news for our project going forward if that comes to fruition.
I read that same article, Lyndon.
Very exciting. Well, we're always keeping an eye on what other funding is available out there. Schools are building a school is not cheap. All right. So with that, if no one else has any other questions or comments on this schedule, I believe I will be handing it off to DRA. Their slides are in here, so I will.
And
Carl,
do you want to allow me to share my screen so I could click through as we
yeah,
go?
if you have it up, I can stop sharing.
I could do that. Yeah, if you can give me permission.
Yes,
Um,
that's the
yeah,
first step.
I need
Allowing you to
permission
do
first.
that. Perfect.
Thank you.
Of course.
There we are. Let me see if I can get that up there. Can you see my screen, folks?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to follow the same sort of order that Jen just laid out for you, just to update you on what's been happening the last couple of months and a little bit about what's ahead of us. Organize it in the same way of the main components of this first submission to the School Building Authority. So the first one, as Jen mentioned, is called the Preliminary Design Program. We may get caught up in acronyms and call it the PDP too. You might hear that as well, PDP. So the assessment of existing conditions is in process. There's a few more visits that our team has to make there just to go through and update the physical conditions. At the same time, we'll be looking at the at the space plans, there have been a few changes since we were through the building the last time, and we'll be updating those plans and kind of comparing them against standards. And at the end of this, there'll be not just a report of the conditions, but there'll also be kind of the description that will ultimately go into what we call the base repair. It'll identify all the deficiencies in the building that would need to be addressed just to bring the building up to today's code and today's standards educationally. And ultimately, we'll use that scope with our cost estimators to put a cost estimate against it. So a lot of districts like to say to their voters, there's sort of not a zero cost option here. Like if they vote down the new project, there's still going to be some capital repair needs, obviously, for the building going forward. And this is a way to quantify that. So I'm sure many of you know the existing conditions. I won't spend too much time on it there, but we'll be looking at, the site as well as the building itself. There are some, physical issues that need addressing. There's certainly handicap accessibility issues, mechanical and electrical systems, in a building of this vintage and so forth. So all of that will ultimately get documented here. Our engineers are looking at, the heating and ventilating system. We know there have been some improvements like the boilers there, some not so improvements to like the electrical switchboards. We're also looking at the equipment like kitchen equipment and vocational equipment too, that gets rolled into it as well, so that we can kind of quantify that as well. So all of that, it makes a very comprehensive report. The next major component of activity, as Jen mentioned, is this educational programming component of this first phase. And it includes the visioning that, and I'll have a quick summary of that too, that rolls into a document called the educational program and another set of documents called space summaries I'll share with you in a moment. So the visioning was organized into 3 2-hour workshops. They were held remotely. You can see kind of a screen capture there of the people involved. There were actually, I think, more than that. And most of there might be a second page to the smiling faces there. And it was led by our educational consultant, David Stephen, and it had a good cross section of educators, teachers, instructors, administrators, parents. There was a couple students as well as the project team too. And the workshops were generally kind of focused first on the big picture down to more specifics by the third workshop. And you can see some of the topics that were addressed in each workshop. I'll kind of summarize those here. So the first workshop, as I said, was kind of bigger picture goals and priorities for the project were identified. And again, David Stephen shared a lot of different concepts and possibilities that people then, right during that 2-hour session, could vote. And there was a polling software available so that we could rate the consensus of the group. And so just quickly, under hopes and goals, some of the things that rose to the top were an updated and larger building. That seemed to be on a lot of people's minds. And that it be kind of a welcoming design was a phrase used, and improve community access. Educationally, you can see some of the topics that rose to the top there, that that the future school focus on student-centered learning, and that the Chapter 74 programs may be expanded, but may also want to consider, being adaptable, recognizing kind of the changing pace of careers these days, that the shops and the instructors and the curriculum needs to, and ultimately the facilities that support them need to be adaptable and perhaps even expandable. And there was this concept of inclusive and differentiated learning. Inclusive, as the word means, to address a wide range of learners, and differentiated means kind of being able to deal with the different way that students learn. Some kids learn best, using their hands. Some kids learn best talking about things. Others learn best reading about things. That, the building, and again, the curriculum should support that. And some of the high level architectural priorities that were identified from long lists of possibilities, that the future project, and again, these were all done kind of without necessarily focusing on whether it's a new building or a renovated building or an addition. What the project turns out to be, whatever it turns out to be, should be flexible. And that has a lot of meanings to it. That it should have some spaces that the current buildings does not have right now that encourage collaboration. Some smaller group spaces, some open spaces, informal, spaces, as well as tutorials kinds of spaces. Again, these are all related to some of the educational priorities, that you need more than just classrooms and shops to make up a new school. And there was a lot of support for having a lot of natural light in the building, throughout the building. That kind of goes with being welcoming in a lot of folks' minds. So that was, again, and again, this is just a quick summary. We'll have a more formal report that comes out of these. The second workshop, we started to focus in a little bit more on specifics, on educational kinds of goals, and some design, so-called design patterns, looking at other precedents. And one way that this was introduced, that we sort of got into this, was kind of analyzing the existing buildings, saying, what are the strengths of the existing school? What are the challenges? You might say weaknesses or things that are lacking. So you can see some of the things that were addressed there. And then we looked at some design patterns of other projects, both in Massachusetts and throughout the country, and some of them DRA projects, but some other schools too. And again, through polling, we're able to identify what were the most popular, the most, which concepts got the most support. And you could also, this is a so-called word cloud, that when people voted in sort of a more open-ended, just typing in words, the words that got the most support, end up being the largest. So for design patterns, that heart of the school notion, that there should be a space that gives a feeling that it's the heart of the school. Sometimes it's the cafeteria commons, and that was noted. And again, open light-filled spaces got a lot of support as a design pattern to be pursued. And then the third workshop, you can see, is getting more specific now, because we're starting to create diagrams. And these were done in small groups after we came together, 20 or 30 of us, talking about, what are some of the guiding principles that should guide the design, again, regardless of whether it's a new school or an addition renovation. And you can see some of the consensus that is documented there, of guiding principles, regardless if it's a addition, renovation, or new. And then we started in a limited time. We had about 20, 30 minutes in small groups. I think there were 4 or 5 groups that each produced kind of diagrams of how the building might want to be organized. And there were some consistent things that started to rise to the top there too, which we'll be following up on as we start now conceptual design. One of the kind of guiding principles for us as designers in this business is, before we design anything, we want to go through this process and understand what is the district's vision for the school. How do they want teaching and learning to happen? What are some of their architectural priorities? And then we'll respond to that and start organizing the building and start developing concepts accordingly. And then one of the other important documents in this phase is called the educational program. And it's really initiated by the school itself, but with input, from this whole visioning effort too, but it does basically look at and it's the sort of prescribed outline that the state asks each district to follow, that says, how are you currently doing something and how would you like to do it? How do you currently teach science and how would you like to do it? That sort of thing, going through the entire school curriculum, right down to, how do you do lunch now? How would you like to do it? How do you do transportation now? How would you like to do it in the future? So it becomes a very important document because clearly, we'll use it as designers, but the state will also use it in analyzing our designs and saying, how well does, this option respond to your educational program? So that will be an important, guide going forward, both for us and for the state. And these are some of the current, some of the key issues that are addressed in that program. As we said, how does teaching and learning happen? One of the parts of this will be what Chapter 74 programs do you want to have? Now's the time to consider new ones. Now's the time to consider enrollments in each of those programs as well. And this first submission, they do call it a preliminary educational program because after September, we'll have a chance to review this and refine it too. As well. And as it's mentioned here, this is a collaborative effort between, administrators, educators, shop instructors, as well as the design team. So ultimately it becomes a collaborative effort and it'll end up being some 50, 60 pages long. It's a pretty substantial document. And then that last component of this phase that we talked about in the programming section is this we sort of take all of that came before here. That's sort of the qualitative description of what South Shore wants to teach and learn, but we want to translate that into a quantitative program where we list every space in the building and how large it should be and how many of them it should be. And the MSBA uses this to compare against their standards, because one way they control costs on these projects is to compare it to, what size and quantity of spaces that they would consider, acceptable on a typical school of this type. For vocational schools, they finally have, developed a template. The Chapter 74 programs do have guidelines as to, how many square feet per student in each shop that can be measured. So all of those become guidelines and reflect back on that phrase that Tom mentioned a moment ago about, the reimbursement rate applies against eligible costs. And it applies against eligible space too. So if the typical program, says there should be 6 science labs, but for some reason your curriculum, your program, wants to propose 8 science labs, the education program has to support that. And if not, the state will say, well, we'll reimburse you for 6. If you want to build 8, that's, an unreimbursable, ineligible space. So we always do, the best to argue on your behalf and work with the educational program to make sure that we put forth a strong argument for all your spaces. The other thing on this project too, as Jen mentioned, one of the variables here is that there's not a set target enrollment for the future project here. This feasibility study is looking at a range of student enrollment, basically from 645 all the way up to 975. So, and it could be anywhere in between there. That's where, one of the essence that needs to be addressed here in the coming weeks and month to think about what makes the most sense for South Shore. And you can do it in a couple different ways. Clearly, you know what your history has been, what your history of waiting list has been. You're taking on Marshfield, you need to think about how many more students that is. And then thinking about now's the time, if you're going to add shops, how many students would be in each of those shops? Maybe some of your current enrollments will shift as well. So that all factors into these space summaries. So we'll be producing multiple space summaries, no doubt, until we get to that one preferred option. As Jen mentioned, it's a preferred design option and it's a preferred enrollment option by December. One of the other parts of this first preliminary design program submission is called site development requirements. It basically addresses these kinds of issues. It wants to lay out, just like the program lays out kind of a listing of requirements for the building. This is a listing of requirements for the site. So we need to think about, you know, the vehicular circulation of cars and buses, how many parking spaces are needed, how many athletic fields, and so forth. And in this project too, you know, most vocational schools do have some outbuildings. We want to think about that. You know, is there sort of a maintenance shop? Is there a greenhouse that's a separate building? Is there a, you know, a concession building? All of those get considered and identified. And we also have that adjacent property, you know, the residential property that this district has acquired recently. We'd want to identify, you know, thoughts about how that's to be used and or incorporated into the, you know, the full site. So that too we'll be working on with the working group going forward. So here's your site now. Obviously, here are the boundaries. The purple lines are the property that the district owns. But the lighter green are the wetlands that on a preliminary basis have been identified that are certainly, you know, some site constraints. And will be, that's one of the amendments you voted on tonight. We're going to update the flagging of those wetlands and pick it up on the survey, just to be more precise and more recent, because this flagging was done, I think it was about 5 years ago now. And the conservation commissions require more recent ones just to make sure things haven't changed. So thank you for approving that amendment. Our consultants will be out in the field shortly to modify this. So, and we did want to mention, like we said, the residential property there on Webster Street too, as to how that factors in. You can see that, you know, there's the developed area of the athletic fields. There is some buildable undeveloped area that, you know, is upland, is not wet. There's also, you know, frontage over here on Main Street that you can see is disconnected, in a sense, cut off by this wetland. But we may want to think about that when we come to options down the road. It gives some flexibility to the design, and we may be able to think of ways, creative ways that can help either in the construction process or maybe in permanently and so forth. So we don't want to give up on that. It may be a useful piece of property there too. So we are thinking about the entire site as we move forward. And then the next part, which we're just starting, is preliminary design options. By the end of September, in that submission, we will have options that address each of these categories. That base repair that we talked about, that's again, it's not really a proposed solution, because it doesn't address your educational needs. It literally only addresses the physical needs of the facility, what would need to be done to bring it up to code and so forth. We'll consider a renovation only. You know, can whatever program we ultimately come up with, however number of students, can the existing building within the existing 4 walls be renovated to accommodate that? I think all of us sitting here most likely would agree that's probably not possible. That's why in the visioning, everyone seemed to focus on needing a larger building. Space was certainly an issue. So that may not be a category that, you know, we continue with, but we do need to, you know, test it in this phase. But we will look at addition renovations, and that category does include, you know, partial demolition. Sometimes in order to do an addition, you do have to do a little subtraction of the existing building to free up some buildable land or something like that. So And then obviously the last category of new construction, there may be several options there too, as to how could we, get a new school on the site to address the educational program in a way that, the site accommodates with minimal disruption to the existing building. And just to show you the way we think about it, again, we're just starting to get into this now because we just are, finishing the visioning and kind of partway through the educational program. So, but we do think about, looking at the existing building, where are there areas for it adding on to the building, potentially. And generally, we think about where are corridors on the inside that we could connect to, or where are there shops that we could expand. How can the building be expanded? Each of these obviously will have pros and cons in terms of how it affects the ongoing operation of the school. There are, you can almost imagine right now, any of these additions are going to be fairly disruptive to the school one way or another. And we have to think about that in terms of how they're proposed. We can't just come up with a design. We have to think about how it gets implemented too. But thinking about the area of potential new construction, the thing that clearly rises to the top right now on a preliminary basis is the area of the athletic fields. For one, it's developed area, it's not wetland. Two, it's kind of away from the existing school. Clearly, you lose, those athletic facilities during the course of construction, but at least you keep, for the most part, the parking, you keep the, the bus circulation, the parent drop off, the access to the building itself. We would have to think about how does a contractor get into that area to build the school while the existing school is in operation, things like that. But it does seem, that we'll certainly come up with some options that fit in that zone. So I think we shared this one with you previously, but this was our earlier one about creating an area for an addition renovation project by suggesting a partial demolition by eliminating kind of the current front door, the office and the allied health and some of the guidance and special ed spaces that are in that front building. Those would have to be replaced either by the residential property next door or by the importing some modular classrooms that could be parked somewhere on site to make up for that loss. But it has some potential as a building because it allows us then to do a multi-story building, a more compact footprint that could be added on to the front of the building. And in fact, adjacent to the gym over here, there's a potential of expanding if more high bay shops like plumbing, for instance, are in the program. This might be a way to create some high bay shops. And also to renovate the existing shops, the high bay ones, we would try to do as much during the summer as possible in terms of construction, but most likely not all of them could be renovated in one summer or even 2 summers. There may be time during the school year when we have to empty out a shop and we could use this new construction area, if it's built first, as so-called swing space to create, construction within the existing building. And of course, with an addition renovation project, the basic strategy is to build the new construction first and kind of minimally impact the existing building. And then once it's built, you can empty out parts of the existing school into the new building to free up areas for the contractor to then work in kind of multiple phases. So that's, one strategy, and we'll look at others for addition renovations. And then for new construction, as we said, going back to the site plan here, we do have a footprint that we've laid in here. It would be a 2 and 3 story building in there. You can see it does overlap, right where the football field and baseball field were, but it does allow, a drop-off area, a service area around the building, some additional parking before the existing building has to be removed, which is shown dashed in red there. And once that building is removed, then you could recreate the athletic field, you could recreate the parking, expand the parking and so forth. And, this would stay out of the wetland areas of the site. But again, this is just one of several options that we'll be working on in the future there. And we'll think about, as we said, not just the final product, but how do we get there too? You know, what are the construction phasing and logistics to build a building like this with minimally impacting the school? And one of the things, for instance, we think about is, you know, the very first year that the school is completed and can be occupied, this existing school is still going to be here. It's not going to disappear instantaneously. And so there's going to be a year where, you know, we have to think about how do you get access to this building? Where can you park for this building while the contractor is demolishing this one and building these new athletic fields? So there will still be, after you occupy the new school, there'll still be some construction going on kind of in the front yard there. So we do have to think about circulation, obviously, and safety and, you know, disruption of those activities in any of these new construction options. And ultimately, as Jen mentioned, we'll produce kind of a matrix with all of the options on one side, and then kind of pros and cons for each of them against a set of criteria that we develop with you all as to, you know, which ones rise to the top. So that's why we say to be continued. That's kind of where we're at on this. And hopefully, as we said, the fun is ahead of us here and it gets more exciting as we start to see more, you know, specific solutions here in the coming meetings. But I'll stop sharing and be able to take questions that anyone may have.
Bob Moeller, I'll start it off.
Yes, Bob.
What I would like to see is some of the newer schools that have been built, whether it's by your outfit, I'm gonna use the word, where they screwed up. You know, we don't want to make the same mistakes they did.
Sure.
It was 74 program or academic programs. And we are going to have to, and I like your way of thinking all the way through, the older students. They're pushing that we are going to have the space for older students. And what I mean by this is whether they're immigrants or getting out of the service or whatever, we're going to have to plan for that. And you brought up what 74 programs we are going to have, and that's, I think we could get some feedback from the newer schools of where they made their mistakes. I would like to have that. And the space plan, we are going to have to, I agree with you, allow for space. It's something as simple as our security. We're going to have at least 3 or 4 closets for the police department to park their butts in. We can't just have one somewhere. So these are just things that I've been through before on our original school and come that, but I do want to know where the other schools have followed up.
Those
Thank
are all
you.
great points, Bob. Thanks for sharing. We certainly learn, you know, lessons learned, so to speak, from prior projects too. But yeah, visiting and talking with other schools is a great opportunity to, you know, for all of us to get smarter. And I know Tom's already working on, you know, with others, the program, like you said, about Chapter 74 programs and what makes sense in your region and in this economy and all.
Yeah, because we have potentially, we got one new town that's already going to be part of us. And we have a potential, another one that is going to be trying to join us that we know of. So that, yes, we do have to plan for sufficient students. Hi, George.
Right.
I'm done.
Thanks, Bob.
I have a couple of questions. Dan from Whitman. I've noticed in a lot of building projects around town where they build in the middle of woods and there's wetlands. And they have actually moved the wetlands. Is that possible?
I
other
think
words,
what I think what you're referring to, Dan, is the state does allow a little bit of filling of wetlands up to 5,000 square feet, but you have to replicate, as they
Right,
call it.
exactly.
So what they
So-
generally do is they expand the wetland somewhere else. They don't
Right.
literally move it, but they generally, add on and expand an existing one. And some towns, I don't know Hanover's bylaw right now, but some towns actually require you to do 2-to-1 replication. In other words, if you fill 5,000 square feet, you have
need
to
10,000.
replicate 10,000 square feet because they know some of the plants are going to die, or it's just kind of the built-in safety factor.
Right, but that's something we may want to look into
Oh,
because
definitely.
where you're saying you have areas that are buildable, but unfortunately they're kind of blocked off with wetlands. We may be able to move things.
Yeah, you're sort of reading our mind, Dan. That Main Street frontage is pretty valuable. And if we
Yeah.
could fill a little bit there and get a roadway across there, that would be great, opportunity to free up, both some land and to safely segregate activities too.
Right, or we may even, if we need that for parking, put the buses back there.
Exactly.
And open
Yep.
up closer to the school for parking.
Right.
Also, what was I gonna say? Also, I noticed when we have done renovations to some of our regular schools in Whitman, when they've done renovations, when you have the new section of the building and the old section of the building, they weren't put together properly and you end up having leaks and mold. That's the situation we have with our middle school. And
Yeah.
I blame that on years ago when they designed it. And one company said, well, we're supposed to be doing this, but the other section wasn't ready yet, but they went forward and did it anyway. And now all of a sudden you have leaks.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to be very, very careful to make sure that we don't run into that same issue.
Yeah, any MSBA project that involves an addition, the basic philosophy is that you almost can't tell the difference. The existing building is brought up to the same like new condition as the addition. And, sometimes, yes, from a structural point of view, you need an expansion joint between the two, but there's certainly ways to make that expansion joint, not leak.
Right. Well, we've had issues in town.
Yeah, okay.
And if I
Whatever.
could add to Carl's response there, throughout the process, the design process, we have multiple people and companies looking at the drawings to make sure that the details are detailed in the right way, to reflect what's actually happening in the existing portion of the building if we wind up with an ad reno. We also have left field will have someone on site as a site rep during construction that will be checking in and watching all of these subs and helping.
Can't be every place, can't be everywhere every time.
We try to be though.
I've seen it happen in some of our town buildings and I've been a selectman for 21 years. So I've seen it.
Mhm.
Okay.
I'm done.
Thanks, Dan.
Oh, also, when
Good.
we're choosing a design, Tom, are we gonna be having it in-house and not on Zoom?
Dan, as we're nearing the closing of our meeting here, we have I've talked with Jen and Carl about having in-person meetings when we're going to be getting into the weeds of
Right.
design conversations. It's just we can always patch people in on the screen,
Yes,
but to have an on-site meeting, the interaction is certainly richer while still not limiting people. So the short answer is yes.
good. I think it's important that we're there, we're seeing it, it's on the big screen, we can ask questions. Okay,
And as Jen and Carl pointed out, the homework we have for the next few months is clear. The decisions in front of this committee will be clear. There's a lot of work that we'll need to prepare and get out to committee members, and also have time for committee members to have time to digest. And Carl's point, Carl reminds me of this on a regular basis. Tom, it's a preliminary report. It's the first draft is not the final draft. I get a little
Right.
jiggy about, okay, it's September 28th. Let's get this. Come on, let's button this up. So we do have to have a first draft, and we will need to make some initial decisions on Chapter 74 programs. And it is a bit of a moving target. Not only are we talking about adding programs, but we're also have this wide enrollment range. And so they're going to produce a lot of what ifs. What if you had 2 more programs and 900 kids or 100 more kids? They're going to put it all out on a nice matrix, and we're going to be able to make an informed decision. We're not going to be rushed to throw a dart at something and say, all right, we got to go with this. Everyone needs to feel comfortable as to why are we going in this direction. But as we move from early August to late September, being in person for a conversation, getting deeper into the design process, I agree, and that will be part of the plan.
Yeah, I don't see a problem in filling the enrollment where we end up turning away some from these existing towns we got now.
I think
You
as
know?
we have all said informally for years, we probably won't be able to build a structure that could address 100% of the local demand. So we just have to try to do the next best thing, what
Right.
the best building that we can afford.
Okay, now I'm done.
Bob Mello, SST. Just a couple of things I think about, and I'm sure you guys are already thinking about this, but is as much student parking as we possibly could have. I don't know if we can utilize some of those nooks and crannies around there. And I think of athletic fields, maybe a soccer field or a separate practice field or something. It's just some things I thought about looking at that aerial shot. I didn't realize how much property we may actually have that we can use that's, kind of tucked off to the corners. So just something I want to stick out there for the time being. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. We'll take that into account.
Bob Mello's thing, Bob Mola, double decker parking.
With solar panels.
Yeah,
Right.
No, no solar panels.
Oh,
Or a satellite parking lot with a shuttle. We'll look at that too.
I like golf carts.
Jen, is that all you have? Carl, you're all set as well?
all set. Thank you very
Yes.
much for your
Yes,
time
that
and
is all we have.
attention.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Uh, Bob H, would you like me to continue with the wrap up here for the remaining agenda items? Okay, very good. So the remaining items we have, the next item is public comment. If there were members of the public here at this meeting, are there any comments from the public? And I do not believe we have anyone on this particular call. Which with no new business, we'll move to a motion to adjourn.
I'll
I'll
make
make
that
it.
motion, Dan.
Motion by Dan and
Second by Bob.
the
Tim.
second by Bob Mola. Thank you. And we'll call the roll for adjournment. Bob H. Bob Hayward, yes. Keith,
Yes.
George Cooney,
yes.
Jim Coughlin,
Yes.
Jack Manning.
You win.
I think, sorry, Jack, motion to adjourn. Are you okay with that?
Yes, I'm fine with that.
Thanks, Jack. Bob Mello,
Yes.
Bob Mola,
Aye.
Dan Salvucci,
Yes.
Frank Mola.
Yes.
Thank you. Tom Petrozelli.
Yes.
And I'm also a yes. Okay, with that, the meeting is adjourned.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good night,
Aye.
everybody.